United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. This meeting is being televised by Chelmsford Telemedia. Anyone else present that plans to record? Great. Okay, welcome to this meeting of the Chelmsford School Committee. Just a reminder, tonight we'll be starting our examination of the school department budget for fiscal year 2021. Superintendent will be presenting the preliminary budget recommendations later in the meeting, and then there will be opportunities for the public to comment on those recommendations at our next meeting on February 25th. If you cannot attend the meeting on the 25th, you can contact any of the school committee members with your suggestions. All right, the first item of business tonight is approval of our minutes from our meeting on January 28th.
I make a motion to approve the regular school committee meeting minutes from January 28th, 2020.
Second?
Okay, any comments, any corrections? All in favor?
Aye.
5-0. All right, next up, we'll hear from our Chelmsford High School representatives.
Hello, everyone. These are the updates on our school. Mock trial had a great debate at regional championships as they went for their 14th consecutive win out of 120 schools. There's a Valentine's Day dance on February 8th, and on Thursday there's a PLTW field trip to UML to present projects. And there was also an international lunch today in the Learning Commons at 2, and that went really well.
Also, the children's play called The Big Top was very successful last weekend. And this Thursday, the 6th, is a parent information night for 8th grade parents. Also, the week of February 10th will be Alice drills at all schools.
Great. All right, thank you very much. All right, anybody else have any good news?
I do?
Yep.
Okay. So I don't want to steal anyone's thunder because I'm sure they're the liaison for Harrington, but they had a very successful Heritage Fair, and I don't want to, if somebody's going to speak about it, I will stop at this point. So they really enjoyed that. And I actually, today at the school, I was able to see all the bulletin boards where the kids did a lot of their work, and it's still displayed. So it was very exciting. And one little boy ran up to me, he's like, "That's mine." I'm like, "That's awesome." So we were having a little good time there. I've talked about this before. We have a relationship with UMass Lowell where we bring in international teachers that are through the U.S., it's through the federal grants from the U.S. Department of Education. And we work closely with Dr. Angelo, and he runs this whole program for us. This year he has 22 international teachers. Chelmsford has 3. They are here. Yesterday was their first day here. We have one from Mozambique, Nigeria, and India. So these are fellows. They're not learning to teach. They're the best and the brightest of their countries, and they're here now working with our teachers. We have Veronica Gabois, who is a French teacher up at the high school. We also have Dr. Stina Cabarud, she's also up at the high school. She's an English teacher, and Michelle Denson, who is an 8th grade English teacher over at McCarthy Middle School. So those are our host teachers with them, and they'll be with us for the next 6 weeks. The group of them, all 22 of them, will be coming to our first March school committee meeting, where we get to meet them and they, share some of their stories. So it's a nice event. Lots of different activities for them, nice receptions at the school. So, we want to thank everyone that's participated in that. It's really enriching for the kids. And that's the end of my good news.
All right, anybody else? Jeff?
As Katrina said, I went to the children's play, and I just wanted to give a shout out to the writer, Christina Reynolds, and the directors, Emma LaCava and Lila Gordon. They did a wonderful job. Everyone, it was fun. It's all student run, and they do a great job every year.
Right.
It was good.
All right, anybody else? Okay. All right, we're now to our public input part of our meeting. If you'd like to speak to the committee about any of the items on tonight's agenda, please come forward and state your name and address for the recording secretary. Okay. All right, moving on then, new business.
Thank you. Our first item of the agenda, this evening we're continuing our look at the schools, Parker Middle School, and I'd like to invite Principal Jeff Parks up to present on some of the happenings at Parker, and I know he's got some staff and students with him, so feel free to just pull a chair up. And we don't usually have snacks, but we brought snacks because we knew you were going to be here tonight.
Very kind.
I'm going to
So welcome.
Thank you. I appreciate it. It's nice to see some of our Parker grads here too. Sadiq and Katrina were very impressed. Nice job. Thank you. So to the committee, thanks for having us. We appreciate the opportunity.
Just pull the mic a little closer to you.
Okay. We really appreciate the opportunity to be able to come out and talk about just a few of the great things happening at Parker. We'll also be mindful, we recognize that you folks have a long meeting to attend to when we're done, so we will certainly, keep that in mind throughout the course of our discussion. We have three areas that we're gonna be focusing on tonight. So within Parker, we think it's important to, thanks, Dr. Hirsch. We think it's important to create shared leadership opportunities, not only for the teachers, but to get the students involved and have them have some input into the daily running of the building. So you're gonna hear about a couple of the programs that we have that really highlight the staff and students having a lot of say in what we do. We have a new student ambassador program that just launched this year, which you'll hear a little bit about. And we have our Pride Committee, which has been in existence for several years. This is the 9th year we've had students participating in the committee. It's something that we're very proud of, and you'll be able to hear from one of our Pride reps as well. So before we move on, I'd just like to quickly introduce the team we have here. Linda Jowett is one of our PE teachers at Parker. Julie Mangan is a 6th grade ELA and social studies teacher. This is Vivian Strip. Vivian is an 8th grader, and she's one of our Pride reps. Kate Harrison is an 8th grader, and she's one of our student ambassadors. And Adam Fody is also an 8th grader, and he's one of our student ambassadors this year. So this is the outstanding group that really said, Dr. Parks, please bring me to the meeting. And I said, we can do that. We can do that. So within our group, within our group and within the school, we have 3 basic areas that our larger PBIS committee had been split up into over the last few years. One of our groups focuses, and these are all teacher-led, one of our groups focuses on building connections, and that's led by Ms. Jowett, and you're gonna hear a little bit more from her. We have an executive functioning committee that's led by another teacher, Dina Wyke, and this year in March, we'll be bringing in a executive functioning expert to help all staff, help us with our ability to meet the needs of all of our students. We have a mindfulness committee that's led by Ashley Jean, and Ashley has been to one of these meetings before with me, and her committee and her group really works to make sure that all the students and staff are taken care of mentally and physically, so that's something that they really focus on. Even though each of the 3 groups has a facilitator or the leader of their group, it absolutely would not run without the input and support of the other teachers that are involved. So while Linda is the facilitator or the point person for the Building Connections group, of course the work that Julie does and the other teachers, paras, just a variety of staff members who have a passion or an interest within any of these 3 areas that will work to continue to contribute so it functions. Okay, so with that, I'm going to ask Ms. Jowett and Ms. Mangan to tell us a little bit more about the Building Connections Committee, and you'll get to hear from some of our ambassadors too.
So as Dr. Parks said, the Building Connections evolved out of the Student Ambassador Program evolved out of the Building Connections, one of the subgroups of our PBIS, and we really wanted to provide students with another leadership opportunity within the school and also a way for the teachers to build some more connections with them. We really wanted to concentrate on service projects, and they've done that, and our 2 ambassadors are going to elaborate a little bit more on that. Currently, we have 12 members, very hardworking faculty, and Officer Sullivan is also on there. So it's a good, strong committee, and like I said, we're just trying to build connections with the kids and give them some more leadership opportunities in the school.
We've also been trying to kind of adjust to the push for civics and trying to work in any opportunity to build leaders and to have students start to become active, involved citizens, and starting with our building. So it's been great that we have participants from 5th to 8th grade, so there's 8 in each grade level. And we started with an election, like right around in October, we introduced the program to students, and we had a lot of interest. They voted for, or everybody had to run a campaign. They had to get a recommendation from a teacher, so it was a big deal. The kids that really wanted it kind of asserted themselves and came for it. So everybody gave a campaign speech in front of their class, which definitely takes guts to speak in front of their peers. And everybody really campaigned positively and showed great pride through the school. We actually even needed to have runoff elections in many of the grades because there were so many candidates that we had to cut it down to the final 2. So we had a lot of homerooms ended up having the runoff. So it was nice to have some of those civic experiences that they might not have heard of a runoff election before, but we're kind of exposing them to these concepts that they're gonna grow up into. So far, we've had a lot of kids gaining experience talking to their classmates, and they're getting organized when we've had meetings. It's amazing how they assemble and they kind of tackle a problem, and we say, what are our ideas? And they have so many that they're willing to share and come up with. So it's amazing. We've only met as the whole group for a couple of hours total this year, really, but they've been able to accomplish so much on their own. They're really great about that, and they just get right to it when we meet. So pass it off to.
Yeah, slide that along.
Thanks, Adam.
Yeah, so this is the first year with the Student Ambassador Program, and so far I think it went very well. Each kid came up with their own kind of campaign and they ran for it, and then it went really well. I had a good experience doing each campaign. He came up with a speech, he advertised, everybody voted, and some classes, I think they were like preliminaries and stuff, you know?
Yeah.
They had so many kids, like you said, they had to like go in heats. But yeah, so we've accomplished a few things this year. We did the Super Bowl, which is our can drive, which is going to end on Wednesday. Yeah, so tomorrow it's going to reach completion. We've had a coat drive, and we collected over 148 coats, and we organized a Thanksgiving food drive, and we completed 14 meals. Yeah, and I think at the meetings, every kid has heard their ideas are kind of used throughout the meetings. Nobody's kind of left alone, and I think that's really good.
Thank you.
In our school, there are 32 homerooms total, and there's 8 per grade. And several candidates would run for each homeroom, and as was said, the peers had to vote for one based off of speeches and campaigns. And as homeroom ambassadors, we would meet once a month, and we would brainstorm and come up with ideas for that month and future projects. Some of our future projects are February Kindness Month, where it's just all, focused on kindness. Mentors for other classes, where we would, go and help out and set good examples. And for the rest of the year, we're focusing more on service projects like donations and just helping out the community, being good citizens of Chelmsford. Yeah, I'm very glad to be part of this, and thank you. Yeah.
Thank you.
So, thank you, Kate and Adam. Before we shift away from talking about the ambassadors, I do want to recognize that beyond being a student ambassador at Parker, Kate Harrison is Chelmsford's Project 351 ambassador. So if you're not familiar with that program, there are 351 cities and towns in Mass, and each town has one 8th grader that is selected to represent them. And Kate went to launch day, and she's going to be heavily involved in some of the other projects that we'll be doing at the school. So thank you for that, Kate, as well.
That's great. Thank you.
So we're going to shift now. We're going to talk about one of our other committees. As I mentioned, our Pride Committee is made up of, again, students and staff, and it's something that we're very proud of at the school. This committee also continued to grow, and so we've shifted and we have 3 primary focus areas. So we divided up the group. So there are several students and staff that work in one of those 3 different areas. So we have a group that focuses on the courtyard now that it's been redone and they decorate it seasonally and make sure that that's well taken care of. We have a group that revamped our school store last year, and they're up and running with that this year. And tonight, what Vivian and I are going to talk a little bit about is the leadership component. And this is the part of the group of peer leaders that are really focusing in on trying to spread that the leadership opportunities throughout the school and community. So, Vivian?
So, as was said, there are 3 groups, and I'm a part of the leadership committee. And so, but as an entire Pride Committee group, we recently went to a conference workshop at Bridgewater State University, and that was a lot of fun. We got to address issues at our school and learn how to fix them, and so hopefully that will be helping us. And so in my group last year, we went and spoke to the 3rd grade students at all of the elementary schools, and we talked to them about leadership and so how they could be leaders as 4th graders. And yeah, so then we checked back in with them this year, and we set up Google Hangout So we met with the 4th grade students from South Row, and we plan to meet with all of the other elementary schools through Google Hangout. And also through Harrington, after us going to them about leadership, they wanted to form their own group. So they also started a student council to kind of mimic our Pride Committee. And so we are planning to work with the Harrington Student Council and teach them how to be leaders and how they can bring it into middle school.
Great job, Vivian. And here's just a look at the committee members. So the way that the students are selected for this is that we ask for input from all of the teachers in the school. We end up, I guess you'd say, drafting students as 7th graders with the hope that they will stay on the committee for 2 years. So as the next group moves on, we would pick up, current 6th graders, but next year when they're in 7th grade, and so we want to continue to have that evolution. Each year we've been able to bring, like Vivian had mentioned, we went to Bridgewater State last week. Each year we try to find a different conference that the kids can go to, and in some cases work with peers from other school districts. In some cases, this case, they worked with about a dozen graduate students from Bridgewater, which was just a great experience for all of us. So we're looking forward to continuing with this program as well. So now, Ms. Jowett's going to tell you a little bit about what we have coming up next week.
So Pride Week is definitely the best week of the whole year, I feel like. Each day of the week, the Pride reps will go to the 5th and 6th grade homerooms and talk about each one of the letters. So perseverance, respect, integrity, dedication, and empathy. Each day they'll go to the 5th and 6th grade homerooms, talk about them. They have a slideshow that they show. So they really concentrate on each of those letters for each day of the week. Also going on during the week, the band is playing in the front lobby. Maroon is throughout the school. Everyone has a lot of spirit that week. It's definitely a lot of fun. There's music in the caf. There is, Dr. Parks makes a slideshow, again, concentrating on each letter of the week. So Monday would be perseverance, and all the pictures would show quotes. He works very hard at it, actually, and it's awesome.
It's fun. It's fun.
And then at the very end of the week on Friday, we have 2 pep rallies that it's really crazy. But the 5th and 6th grade students play each other in a game, and it's usually ultimate volleyball because it's a game that a lot of students can play, and the winning team gets to play the teachers, so it's also a game that a lot of teachers are able to play. Not a lot of skill involved and not a lot of running around.
Watch it.
Says the marathon running PE teacher, right? Yeah.
The 5th and 6th grade students are, they let their homeroom teachers know if they're interested in being chosen to play. You don't have to play, and you don't have to, you can certainly be on the sidelines and not be a participant. And their names are drawn, and they know ahead of time that they're going to be a participant in the game. And then whichever team wins the 5th or the 6th grade, they play the teachers, the 5th and 6th grade teachers in a game. And then the 7th and 8th grade students, same idea, except their names get drawn at the pep rally, so they come out of the crowd and everyone's cheering wildly for them. And same thing, the 7th grade plays the 8th grade and the winning team plays the teachers. 7th and 8th grade earns the right to vote for their game that they want to play. We used to all do ultimate volleyball, but now they choose. And the Pride kids set up a voting system where the kids can vote, number 1, if they want to be chosen to play, and number 2, which game that they want to play. So it's if you get a chance to pop over next week, it's really a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Did I forget anything?
No, that was
Okay.
excellent.
All right.
Thank you. It's a great week, and it's a great way to roll into vacation. It's just a lot of fun. It's a great community building for the whole school. And then we're gonna wrap up before we certainly will be happy to take any questions that you might have. A few coming attractions to Parker. So this weekend on Friday and Saturday is our school play. We'll be at the McCarthy Auditorium on Friday at 7, and then on Saturday at 2:30, and again at 7. In just a few weeks is our Parker's Got Talent, our annual talent show, which is always a blast. This year, we're actually having it at the PAC because the last few years, we've actually had to turn people away from McCarthy because just too many folks want to come, which is a wonderful problem to have, and we're excited to be able to have the show at the PAC this year. And then the third thing, which is, right around the corner, is will be our third annual Science and Innovation Fair, which will be held on March 12th, right at Parker. We do have a few people who have stepped up that want to be judges. I also do know that every school has asked you the same, but please know if you're willing and you're interested in coming by, we'll either put you to work, or we'll just gladly, thank you, Donna, or we'll just gladly have you come and mingle and enjoy all the projects. So we're looking forward to that as well. Okay, so again, I'd like to just, thank this group for coming out and, helping me participate, or helping to participate with this. I do know with these students, I could probably have sat back there and they would have done just fine running this entire thing, but thank you for letting me chip in a little bit too, I appreciate it. So with that, we'd be happy to entertain any questions that you have, and we'll take it from there. Thank you.
Anybody have any questions?
No questions. I just want to thank you for all of your hard work, and you did an excellent job presenting the information. Parker's lucky to have you all as student leaders.
Thank you.
Anybody over here?
I'm just gonna make a comment. First of all, when we had the presentation on civics, it was one of the things I said, that I think it's really important to incorporate more civics right into the student organizations in the schools. Secondly, thank you for not shying away from having actual elections, because I think that that's been one of the things in the past few years where people don't want to have to choose between a couple of candidates, and it's part of our system. So it's important that that's happened. You all did a tremendously great job. I'm sure you're gonna love your roles as leaders as you move forward, and it only makes the next experience much better. Thank you for all the hard work. Appreciate it.
Yep. And I just want to say, great job presenting, and Dr. Parks did all right, too.
I did have one question. I know last year you came here, you talked about homework committee, and did anything ever come out of that?
We had ran the survey a couple of years ago. We ended up going back, and the students did presentations for each of the teams of teachers and showed them, this is what came out of it. We didn't formalize anything that was the same for every grade level, but the teachers did receive the feedback, and I certainly have noticed, particularly in the upper grades, or maybe even across the board, I do think there's a lot more thought put into like a shared calendar. So the teachers, let's say if we're all working on a team together, are more aware of what other teachers are giving long-term assignments, who's giving the test on Friday. I do know a lot of our teams have created Google calendars where they're watching for their teammates to put in what they're doing as well. And I think that was, a result of some of the survey. So there's definitely some good things that came out of it. We're at the point now where the students who really spearheaded that effort are all freshmen. So I think it's something that, should it become one of our areas again that we think we need to focus on, we might do it with some of our younger students coming up to see if we can impact a little, or affect a little bit more change.
Great. Thank you. Nice job tonight. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, guys.
Very
to see
good
you.
job, guys.
You can pass out my snacks.
Jeff, we got a few pictures from this side too that we'll send to you, and you can feel free to share with parents
I already
and
tweeted it out.
staff. Oh, okay.
It's on social media.
All right. Perfect.
Excellent. It's under control.
Instantaneous.
We can clear a room, huh?
We really can clear the room. They all come to listen to the kids.
They do.
Not us.
All right, number 2 on the agenda this evening. What's that?
We lost the whole crowd.
I know, I said we can clear a room. We know how to do that. Number 2 this evening on the agenda on a new business is just a report that we received from Sue Rosa from the Town Health Department. This is that project interface referral service that we have that allows for staff or students, community members to access some clinical health supports. So we typically get this every 6 months or so. Excuse me, and I just wanted to share it with you. This is a report that actually details different transactions from last June right through the end of November. And as you can see, I think this is a great resource for the community Previously, we talked about this at a school committee meeting. We talked about actually highlighting on our website, like a direct link to this. So on our district site, as well as the individual school sites, there is a little link, it's some type of a picture for the William James Referral Service, so that if someone is in need of some type of assistance, they can click on that. It's a very good referral service. And again, the numbers speak for themselves. You can see that, the clinicians are dealing with a high number of reported cases of anxiety and stress among not only parents and adults, but also students. So just wanted to pass that information along to you to let you know it's still, obviously, we pay a portion of it. It's a cost that was split 3 ways. The school department pays a piece, the Board of Health pays a piece, and the town pays a piece. And I think it's very worthwhile. So just to share the information.
I would
with you.
agree, and if you look at how the calls learn about service, the schools are the main source.
Number
So,
one, yeah.
I mean, obviously, people are looking.
It was that
towards
link
us.
on the website that I think threw us over the top.
No? All right, any questions?
For this, is this part, we're gonna get a presentation from guidance and psychology and so on this year.
And the student support services.
Okay, the student services. I wonder what the link is with this. Yeah, it will be interesting. We can ask them when they come.
Which link?
But they must refer to this as well.
Oh, they do. I do know that, like our school psychologists, our school counselors will refer through this as well.
Okay.
But no, that can come up, and if you like, I'll actually make a note for when student support comes up to make sure that they touch on that.
It was interesting to see the cost and what we get out of it, because the cost is not as much as the value. I remember this.
No, it's a very, very worthwhile.
Small amount compared to
It's
this.
a very small amount
Compared
and
to
for the
this.
people that actually are helped.
It's great.
Can the community services person also make referrals for this?
Oh, certainly.
Okay.
Yeah, no, anyone in the town
Okay,
can,
I
and I
wasn't
do
sure.
know the new social worker for the town, I forget her exact title, but no, she would refer through this as well. Any of our parents, it's not even that you need a referral, but you can just go on the website, get the contact information, and directly reach out to them. But it is a service that we certainly promote.
All right, anything else on that? Okay. All right, moving on. So, school committee.
We'll do half tonight, we'll do half at the
Maybe a
next meeting.
One of the things that came out of our work over the summer, when we're setting up our goals, is to set some time aside to kind of, during the middle of the year, see what we're doing as far as meeting our goals or addressing our goals, and then, see what else we can do going forward. So what I try to do is go through our agendas since, I think, August, September, and see where we've touched upon some of our stated goals for the year, and then also set up some anticipated future work, things that we could probably do over the next couple months to continue to work to those goals. So I sent this out early in the week. I don't know if people had a chance to look it over, and if they have any thoughts on either end of it. If you think there are other ways that we've touched upon our goals or other things we can do going forward, I think it'd be a good time to hear all that.
Oh, I think this is fantastic. Thank you very much for doing
Yeah.
this. I know it was a lot of work. And will this go up on the website so that people can see? I know we post our goals, but can we put this too as well so people can see what progress we've
Oh,
made?
on the actual school committee website?
Yes.
Yeah, I did not yet, but it's in the packet online, but I can
Okay.
pull this out if you want.
Yes.
And put it on your goal page.
Great, thank you.
Any other thoughts, particularly if anticipated future work? Any other things you think that we could do going forward on any, whether it's the district goals or our own professional development goals towards the end there?
I think we need to continue to stress the diversity and making sure the policy is included all throughout the district
Okay.
and applied all throughout. I think we need to start seeing some more language up on our website, on any kind of recruitment, things like that, that's consistent.
We could do that and maybe review our policies and just make sure everybody's
I
in
think it would
agreement
be
that.
important.
Okay, all right, we definitely put that on an agenda in the upcoming meeting.
I think it's important we keep working on the communication through the website, social media, and, I think that's really important to keep everyone in tune with what we're doing.
All right, any other thoughts?
I think we have some good opportunities sorry, coming up to be able to reach out to the town meeting reps,
Yep.
maybe in advance, remind them of the upcoming budget public forum hearing.
Yep.
So that way they can participate if they.
Right, and we talked about too, make sure to get the budget book to the pre-town meeting. So I think those all help in terms of that. Okay, any other thoughts? Okay, if you think of other things that we could add to these lists, by all means, we can throw them on there, and it could be a work in progress. Okay, all right, moving on to
All
the main event.
Exciting part of the night. This is our, the start of our budget process. So just to recap for you, the budget process will start this evening with the budget that Joanna will actually hand out to you. And then I have a little PowerPoint that we'll review that talks about some of the various elements of the budget. What's that?
Do you want them out now?
Oh, yeah, you can pass them up.
Before we do that, do we have a field trip that we have to approve?
Oh, I thought we'd do that.
It's toward the end.
Oh,
Yeah.
sorry.
You jumping the gun there, Donna.
I'm sorry. Trying to
You want to skip the budget thing, go right to the field?
Yeah.
All right, so we did a couple of things a little bit differently, and I'll touch on this as we go through the budget document itself. But when you do get the budget, I'll wait a second for you. If we start on page 1, I'm actually going to walk through a little bit of a financial overview for Chelmsford, a little bit of an academic review on how we're doing, and then talk about some of the highlights of the budget that's incorporated in here. You're not expected to take any action tonight. You just kind of listen to take it in, and then ask any questions you would like between now and our first budget hearing, which is Tuesday, February 25th. So if you recall, we moved the Tuesday meeting, which was over February vacation, to the Tuesday after, so that gives you an extra week to review. So that'll be the first kind of public budget hearing. So a large portion of the budget will be spent on that. So some of the spreadsheets that we've received good feedback on year over year as we talk about spending in the Chelmsford Public Schools, I've updated for you in this report. So if you actually start on page 1 of the budget book, and I recommend not moving ahead. We're just going to start on 1. Everyone likes to jump right to the end, right?
Because we don't pass out the materials earlier.
See, you would have been halfway through it by now.
And lay out the
Given
ground
what
rules
it
ahead
has.
of time.
Yeah.
No going
So if we
ahead.
start on page 1, these are just going to help you line up the charts. So I'm obviously not going to read from the budget document, but just give you some of the highlights. A lot of the different information I'm going to provide tonight based on actual expenditures are based on the actual dates that the DOE has certified our figures. So you're going to see, like on this first chart, it dates back to fiscal 18. So technically we're in 20 now, but the last year that they've actually posted actuals is fiscal 18. So that's what we look for. So one of the things that we have talked about significantly over the last number of years is exactly where Chelmsford stands spending-wise, how much we spend on net school spending compared to our comparable districts, and also just across the state. So I think this chart's kind of telling. There are 321 districts in the state that received money and reported money for fiscal 2018. When people hear, we're spending above net school spending, you have to think about net school spending as basically being the floor. So that is the minimum amount of money that a district would want to spend to provide what the state terms as an adequate education. So if you look at this particular chart, in 2018, there was only one district in the entire Commonwealth that actually spent anything less than net school spending. So sometimes you'll hear people make the argument that, well, we met net school spending. Well, meeting net school spending really isn't the number that you're striving for. That's your absolute floor. Because again, out of 321 districts, only one didn't make net school spending. And here's where we fall. So not even just compared to our comparables, but all districts in the state, we're about in the middle. So out of the 321 districts, we had 174 that actually spent less than Chelmsford, and we had 146 that spent more than Chelmsford. So on this little chart, you can see that most of these figures I'm going to share with you tonight has Chelmsford being right about in the middle. I think what that signals to me, and we've talked about this over time, is I don't think we're spending too much on education. I don't think we're spending too little on education. I think we're getting a very fair dollar amount from the town. I think the town meeting reps have been very gracious in the past as far as supporting school initiatives, whether it's our local operating budget, our capital budgets, different initiatives that we bring forward. We've gotten very good support. We've gotten good support from the town as well with recommendations on budget, and I think we receive a fair allocation in proportion to what other, obviously, communities in the state are receiving, comparable districts are receiving, as we'll see in a few minutes, and certainly other town departments. Turn your page to page 2. So one of the things, again, we've talked about a little bit is the state takes a look at what they call your comparable districts. So oftentimes when you're doing analysis, one might think, we're in Chelmsford, so where do we stand based on our neighboring communities? But there's really a lot of variability if you think about, we're touching Lowell and Dracut and Billerica and Tingsboro and Tewksbury. They're all right near us. Some have very different student populations. So one of the things the state likes to do is you certainly want to see what's happening with your neighboring communities, but you also want to look statewide. It's what's happening with your comparable communities. And they actually take a look at all the different districts statewide that have a similar makeup to us, elementary schools, middle schools, and high schools that have a similar grade level configuration, demographics, and they actually then report who are your 10 most comparable districts. So in this particular chart, you'll see for the last year that this was reported, which was 2018 as well, our comparable districts are Ashland, Billerica, which happens to be one of our neighboring communities, Chelmsford, Easton, Mansfield, Marshfield, Melrose, Natick, North Andover, North Attleboro, and Wakefield. And they report the different enrollments by those districts. Economically disadvantaged, that used to be the free and reduced lunch header in the schools. Students with disabilities, so those would be students who are on individual education plans, and then ELL students. So when we take a look at our districts with regard to this, you can see actually there are 7 districts that have a higher percentage of students and 3 districts that have a lower percentage of students who are designated as economically disadvantaged. So we actually were in the bottom half of that particular ranking among our neighboring communities. Of all Chelmsford school systems, when we take a look at our students with disabilities, we're in the top half on this category. 16.9% of our students have IEPs. There are 7 districts that actually have a lower number of or lower percentage of students that are on IEPs, and only 3 districts that have a higher. What's interesting on this, the ELL classification, which is your last category, Chelmsford actually has a higher ELL population than 7 of our comparable districts, which again, we've seen our numbers increase over the last few years. There were only 2 that actually have less, and we're tied with one of them. When we also then take a further step, because we're going to take a look at these districts and compare financially, we're going to take a look at a number of different factors. We're going to look at, again, percentage of required net school spending, where these 10 communities happen to fall, teacher ratios, student-teacher ratios, salaries and whatnot, and see where we line up. So our first comparable here is, of these 10 communities and also the state in this next chart, number 2, for fiscal year 2018, which again is the last year that the data was reported, as a percentage of required net school spending. So again, we talked about 0 being the floor, so that's why you see all these percentages are obviously over 100%. Chelmsford is actually second to the top on this particular list at 138.6%. So we only have one district, Natick, who's actually spending more as a percent of required net school spending than the other 8 communities. So we're certainly in that particular list spending more than our comps. This is one category we actually spend more than the state as well. So the state average is down in the middle of the graph at 125.8. So again, when it comes to spending, we're spending on the top end as far as a percentage of required net school spending. I think that's important because we would not want to be on the bottom half or the low end. Certainly we wouldn't want to be under state average, and we wouldn't even want to be on the lower end of our comps. That would mean that we're not spending enough to support our education. The next chart and the next thing we take a look at is student-teacher ratios. So we're actually right in the middle of this comp. And you've seen our actual student-teacher ratios have dropped over the last couple of years. But we have 5 districts that actually have a slightly better. So in this particular chart, you want to be closer to the top because that would mean your ratio is lower. So there are 5 districts of our comps that actually have a slightly better student-teacher ratio than we have, and there are 5 districts that have a higher student-teacher ratio. Again, this is something that when we get into even just head counts per room, the state is basically taking the total number of students you have and dividing it by the number of teachers you have to come up with these. It doesn't mean that in our classrooms we actually have 13 or 14 students. per teacher. But this would take into consideration all of our staff that are licensed, our regular ed teachers, our special ed teachers, and things along those lines. On average teacher salary, this is another factor that we've taken a look at year over year. And again, you're going to see Chelmsford right in the middle on this particular chart. We have 4 districts that actually have a slightly higher teacher salary average. This is based on 2008 data than us. And we have 6 districts that actually have a lower average teacher salary. The state average, you'll see, is slightly higher than us as well. So in 2018, we were at 78,671 as our average. Statewide, it's 80,222. So that's actually another factor that we've been we're closing the gap on. But for this particular chart, again, you're going to find we're right about in the middle of our comps and slightly below the state.
Do we have any idea whether the reason those, for example, a neighbor of ours is 5,000 something above? Is this because they might have a lot more senior teachers than we do, or is it because they just pay a higher amount overall?
If you're speaking to Barica specifically, I know Barica's salary scales are just significantly higher than ours.
Okay.
I honestly do not know the composition of their staffing. I would say that's probably not the case, though, because when we just concluded negotiations, one of the things that we looked at was how senior our staff was on the salary scale. And I want to say 55 or 56% of our teachers were on top step. And again, this is off the top of my head. I might be off by a percent or two, but more than half of our teachers in the district were on top step. So we really actually have a very seasoned and veteran group of staff in our district. So I don't think that that would be the case. I would wager to bet with Barica it's their higher pay scale.
It's just a higher scale.
Yeah. You do have to look at communities that are touching different districts too. So Barica happens to be close to us, but on the other side of Barica, you have Bedford. Bedford pays extremely well. So Barica is in a little bit of a quandary where they're competing with Bedford, which is an extremely high-paying district. If we had, say, like a Bedford or a Lexington or a Wellesley touching us or joining us very closely, we would obviously be in competition for that same pool of staff. The closer you get to the closer you get to 128, you're going to see rates start to go up. That's why it doesn't really surprise me that along the 128 corridor, the Burlington area down that way, you're actually going to see both admin and teacher rates go significantly higher. And it's going to go down a little bit the further you get away from those main corridors. Let me see. Per pupil spending. So this is another category that we've looked at year over year to see, again, where Chelmsford stands. This is based on fiscal 2008 data, and you'll see that we're right in the middle of this particular grid as well. We have 4 districts that actually spent slightly higher than us on per pupil in fiscal 2018. We have 6 districts that spent a little less than us, and the state average you'll actually see is a little bit higher. So again, that's going to tie into the other factor where the state was slightly higher on us with some of these wages. But again, you're going to find Chelmsford's right in the middle as far as spending is concerned. If we then shift a little bit to academic performance, because again, we take a look at the money that we receive from the state through Chapter 70 and through the town, obviously to support our education program, and you want to see how that matches up academically to see how Chelmsford kids are performing against both their peers in the state. So last year we weren't able to provide some of this data because when I did the budget, we had that year where we had some districts using PARCC, some were using the MCAS assessment. This past year was the year that we went to the next generation MCAS. All districts in the state took the test. Most of it was electronic, so we actually have data, but this is going to be our benchline year, so our benchmark year. When it came to our grades, and this is cumulative, all students in grades 3 to 8, just a couple of factors to look at on English language arts. You can see actually that we scored 3rd highest from the top in this particular area. Marshfield and Melrose outscored us slightly, and then we we tied with 1, Natick, and we bettered the other 7 districts that are our comps. And again, on this one, significantly outperformed the state average. Chelmsford at 68% of all grade 3 through 8 students on the ELA MCAS exam. When it came to mathematics for the same grouping, grades 3 to 8, we actually finished in the middle of the pack on this one. Again, your numbers are a little bit closer on the percentages, but we had 5 of our comparable districts score slightly higher than us. 5 comparable districts scored lower than us. And again, you'll see that we're significantly above the state average on this one. When it comes to the academics, we're going to be, even though our spending is less, we're significantly higher with our districts. Science was actually offered in 2 different grade levels, in grades 5 and 8. Our kids did a great job on their science assessment. So we actually finished tied for first in this particular category with 65% of all of our students scoring in the meets or exceeds expectations category. So that was excellent. And again, beat the state average by 15 points. So that's pretty significant. Good news continues as we get up to the high school level. So in the 10th grade, we had ELA and mathematics figures. Our 10th grade students who participated on the MCAS exam, only one district, Ashland, they got us by a point, but Ashland outscored us with 82% of their students. 81% of all Chelmsford High School students scored in either, we got a little work to do, scored in either the meets or exceeds expectations category in the MCAS, but which is excellent for our first year. And then we outscored the other 8, and again, significantly above state average. So that's very good for us. And then lastly, when it came to mathematics, again, scored very high. Ashland again, we're gonna have to take a trip there and find out what they're doing. They got us by a point again with 81%, but again, our students really did an excellent job on their 10th grade MCAS exam in mathematics, with 80% of the kids scoring in the meets or exceeds category. So again, my takeaway financially is that we typically are spending certainly below the state average in spending, but when it comes to performance, we're performing high above the state average. When it comes to our comps on spending, we're about in the middle in most categories. But again, our performance, we're certainly in the top half, if not top third, in most of these categories. So I think that actually bodes very well for Chelmsford. And I think as a town, we get an exceptional education. It's a good quality education, and our kids are certainly performing well and beating their peers, both in comparable communities and in districts statewide. Can I have one more water? Thanks. Okay, so now if we slide to page 12, Don, you're gonna have to go back to page 12 if you've gone a little further. Just teasing. So on page 12, this is something that we take a peek at each year. This is gonna kind of get into the nuts and bolts of our budget. So a couple of weeks ago, Town Manager Cohen recommended, or presented his budget to the Board of Selectmen, or the Select Board. That will ultimately go before the Finance Committee, and then it goes to town meeting the last Wednesday in April. So in that budget, and he had telegraphed this when we got together for FinCom in December, was going to be recommending for the schools an increase of $2 million from our $61 million base in fiscal '20 to $63 million in fiscal '21. So that was a number we had in the back of our mind as we were putting together our budget for this year. You know, if there were significant costs or drivers that were going to exceed the $63 million recommendation, I would come to you this evening with that. I think if there were significant savings we could realize also, I would come to you and have that conversation. I think after we go through this process, the recommendation is actually a fair recommendation. It's going to provide some pretty significant increases in services and programming for us, and I'm going to walk you through that now. All of these recommendations are built into the budget you have before you that we'll start to deliberate at the end of February. The first thing that we have done is, because again, all but one of our contracts are settled with our employee unions, so we know what the steps and lane costs are going to be for next year. So that has been incorporated into the base salaries. So all steps and lanes have been adjusted. We'll walk you through how to read the budget document after so that you can actually crosswalk that. Any known retirements we have for teachers, we have a handful of teachers every year that retire. We, for the last number of years, have budgeted those savings as a new teacher coming in at Master Step 3. So when we go through this, that's kind of a number that we have in mind. It doesn't mean that that's a cap. If there's a case where we can get a fantastic teacher and it's going to cost us a little bit more, we will do so. It just typically over the last couple of years, that has been what the average is. You're gonna have a number of teachers who are gonna come in at step one because they might be coming right out of school. You're gonna have some teachers who are coming experienced, but the average has worked for us. Or I would have been coming back during the school year and actually needing transfers, and we haven't had that. So that's actually, we have some surpluses built up because of those hirings. We're also seeing a little bit of a decrease in special education overall, out-of-district tuition costs in this budget. So for the second year in a row, we actually have a decline in the anticipated tuition costs for students who are in out-of-district placements. That is offset slightly by using less school choice funds as an offset. We'll get into that when we get to the SPED budget, because we're now earmarking our school choice funds for the one-on-one initiative. Prior to us doing the one-on-one computer or Chromebook initiative, we were using an offset to special ed tuition with those school choice funds. We technically don't need to do that now. We're also able to not take that offset and divert it totally to technology because our out-of-district tuitions are going down. What's going to help us additionally is our circuit, and I know this is a lot, but when we get to the pages, I'm happy to walk you through it. But our circuit breaker projection for next year is also going up. We had budgeted less circuit breaker for the current year than we actually received, so we're making an adjustment for that. And we also don't know exactly what the amount is going to be for the transportation reimbursement under the new SOA funding. However, we know it's going to be more than we have now because we weren't getting any. So we've conservatively put in a factor of anticipated, about, I think, $375,000 of more circuit breaker being available. And when we get to our revolving fund discussion, we're still carrying a very healthy balance in the high twos, close to $3 million as a buffer. So you've maxed out that fund as far as how much you can carry over year to year. We will have a conversation later this spring because you never want to carry over more than a year's allocation, or you technically have to turn it back. We don't want to get in a situation to do that. So that is something that Joanna and I monitor very closely, and so we will have some recommendations on that front. But part of the reason we're able to actually add and augment some services in this fiscal #21 budget is because, again, those things going our way. $2 million additional revenue being recommended by the town manager, some additional savings in special ed tuitions, and additional smaller elements as we go through the budget. So here are some of the factors and some of the new programs in the budget. The first one is, so if you're following me, we're actually on the bottom of page 12, the last bullet. This is going to be the last year of the phase-out of basically the split team at McCarthy. So 3 years ago, we actually started to phase out the extra split team at McCarthy. We removed 2 teachers from the 5th grade. The year after, we removed 2 teachers from 6th. This current year that we're in, we removed 2 7th. And then at the end of this year, we'll remove the last 2 teachers. So at the end of this, Parker and McCarthy are both going to have an identical blueprint as far as staffing and configuration for their programs. And we are able to do that and still stay within the class size guidelines as I'd reported previously. It certainly is something that we watch. I will tell you over the projection, and you can't go too reliable more than 3 or 4 years out, but for the next 3 years, I really do not anticipate any issues with that, and still keeping well below the class size guideline. So that is still continuing to work for us. The largest group we had right now is our current 8th grade students. We'd had a little bit of a dialogue last year. It would have been cleaner to remove the whole split team for 7th and 8th because the teachers actually worked with both grade levels. We just couldn't do that because the number of students in 8th grade was too high. It would have made the class sizes for 8th grade go 27, 28, which we didn't want to do. So we allowed the 2 teachers to stay. They're basically, one's teaching math and science, one is teaching ELA and social studies for this last year, but then they'll phase out with the students. So those 2 positions at McCarthy are basically freed up to be used elsewhere in the budget. At the high school level, one of the first recommendations we have for inclusion of new positions and services is the addition of a school nurse position at the high school, just a part-time LPN. One of the things that I think you'll find helpful is at the very back of the...
You skipped a page.
What?
You skipped a page.
Yeah.
You skipped a page.
Yeah, I didn't go.
Oh, okay, so I'm sorry. When I put the, so John, you can go off script at this point.
Can I ask, are we commenting today at all, or?
Yeah, you certainly can comment, but if you don't mind, it's easier for me to get through the list, and then we can comment and talk. I went off script a little bit on my PowerPoint because I was putting the slides together a little differently. So all the bullets are going to be presented, but they're not in exactly that order. So maybe if you give me, let me just go through my presentation. Please don't shake your head at me. Let me go through the presentation, then we can gladly talk. So one of the things at the very end of your budget book, the last appendix, you're going to find are a bunch of different memos from different administrators in the district that actually have some further backup and justification with rationales for some of these positions we're adding. So I didn't bake them all into the PowerPoint, but you actually do have a memo that talks about why we'd be adding some of these services. If you think about us right now, this has been something that's been requested for a couple of years, and we just haven't been able to do it. At our middle schools, we have a full-time RN in each building, and we have a .7 LPN in each building. So the total middle school population ultimately factors up to the high school, and we still only have 2 RNs at the high school. So we basically don't have the 2.7 LPNs. The 2 RNs at the high school are fantastic, but for the last couple of years, particularly with the number of forms that they're required to complete and verify for like athletics and field trips and whatnot, they're getting a little bit backlogged with just some of the day-to-day care. So we had talked a little bit about, would it make sense for some clerical support, but in the end, what we came around to is if we actually had even just one, so a .7 LPN at the school, it could help with the review of all those different forms. It could also float to help in the event that one of those 2 nurses was out, you'd have a nurse as opposed to just like a secretarial clerical type person. And again, it's going to help with our ratios. And it's going to put them more in line with the district. It still doesn't match the district because technically you'd be adding 2 LPNs if you wanted to match that same model coming up. But the request was for this one position, and I think this is actually going to go a long way for them. At the high school, again, last year we actually we hired a world language coordinator for the program. We had worked with our students and parents this past fall to survey them on if we were going to bring back a 3rd language at the high school, what would that look like? Which language would people really like? The response that we received was that ASL, or American Sign Language, was really something that students were interested in. And we are ready at this point to implement a 3rd language back with a teacher and, again, augment some of the online stuff that we're doing. So the budget does include adding back a full-time world language teacher for ASL. I put it at the high school right now. Again, it's going to be a 1.0 position. What we might actually do, and again, Linda and the middle school staff are working on this, is talk a little bit about doing some kind of a survey type class in the Parker and McCarthy program so the kids can get a sense of it, because we don't want kids at the middle school only be in French and Spanish and then get to high school and have that 3rd option. So we're thinking if we're going to eventually be building this out, we may have to get into the middle schools and at least give the kids some exposure so that they know that that's an option, so that there's a little bit of play in that. So it's a full-time position, but again, we don't know that we're even going to have the need for 5 classes at the high school in year 1 of the rollout of this program. We may have some flexibility to go into the middle schools, so I don't want you to hear that this is only at the high school if we start having a little bit of dialogue about how they're going to be working with the middle school staff too. But I think that's actually going to be helpful for us. You do have a memo at the end of the packet. We've looked at some of our day-to-day sub rates for both teachers and nurses, because we continue to just have a difficult time attracting people to the role. Part of this, and Cheryl actually put a nice memo together, part of this has to do with minimum wage increasing. And the fact that if you actually break out the hourly rate that we're paying our day-to-day subs at $75 an hour, it's at or slightly below minimum wage. So there's a rationale to basically increase our rate next year for the teacher substitute rate from 75 to 90. It would put us more comparable to what other districts in our area are paying. This is a factor that we're more concerned about our neighboring districts as opposed to our comps, because someone is not going to sub in Chelmsford and sub in Natick. I'm not concerned about that. So we're more concerned about your Chelmsfords, Drake's, Andovers, and whatnot. And in the report at the end of the packet, you'll actually see some districts, we're actually at the cheapest, I think, at 75. Some are 80, some are 85. A few have gone to 90 or 100. But the recommendation is actually to go to 90. It's a small financial differential between the two, and we're hoping to be able to kind of do this once so that we don't have to adjust this rate for a couple of years as minimum wage continues to increase. And then also, we might be able to get out ahead of some of these other districts who move to 90 after us and secure a workforce that likes it here and stays. So you do have a recommendation in the packet for that. We've added a little bit of money in the day-to-day nurse fund because, again, we found that we're significantly on the low end of the nurse rate. So we're at $130 a day now for a nurse sub. So we're recommending to bring that up to $150 a day. So this is all cost out for you within the budget, but I think that will actually go a long way as well to help attract nurses when we do have shortages in the district. Within technology, we're recommending a few additional positions here. The first is a instructional technology specialist position, and then second is some additional technology assistance at the middle school, one at Parker and one at McCarthy. So as we roll out the one-on-one initiative in the schools, we're obviously putting a lot more devices in the hands of students and staff. And we want to make sure that we're properly supporting staff, with training and professional development around this. Next year, we're going to be looking at, minimally over 1,500 devices in the hands of staff and students with this one-on-one Chromebook initiative. At the middle school level right now, we have the luxury of having two phenomenal ITS supports. Debbie is at McCarthy and Ian is at the Parker Middle School, but they're confined most parts of the day to the computer lab because they teach computer classes. So one of the things in talking to Bill and strategizing about how to actually free up those ITSs that we already employ to be able to get them out into the building more to help teachers. They can go in and co-teach and actually help roll out lessons in classrooms and also be a support to students, is to hire a tech assistant like we have at the elementary schools that basically operate the labs. They would work hand in hand with the ITS, but that would then free up the ITS to get into the buildings. And it's less expensive than hiring an ITS to actually be in the labs. But again, I think what we're going to see is by freeing up those two ITSs to get in the building, it's going to be significant assistance that they're going to provide to staff and students. And then at the high school, we actually currently have one full-time ITS. But we're going to recommend one additional to not only be at the high school, but to be able to float between our middle schools or also the high school, just to be able to get into classrooms again, to help teachers with this new technology, help them if they're doing different Google projects or whatnot, so that they're comfortable with the technology. The one ITS we have, again, is excellent, but as Bill, he put a rationale together in his packet, they're overbooked. It's like you walk into the Apple store at the mall, and they're booked up for 3 or 4 hours. You just can't find time with these people. So that's a recommendation to continue to push our technology initiative forward in the schools. Taking a look at some additional direct service provision at the elementary schools. We have, and again, Amy at the end of the packet has a rationale for some additional SPED programming. We have a significant number of students, 20 or 30 more than we typically see coming up from CHIPS next year into our kindergarten classrooms in the schools. Our kindergarten classroom enrollments are high anyway, but with an additional 30-plus students already in our district on ed plans, it is going to put a significant strain on those schools. So when we analyze the caseload, to be able to really get a little bit deeper into some of the services that we need to provide, and again, we've also been talking about providing extra literacy services and supports for students with Tier 2 and Tier 3 interventions. We need 3 additional special ed teachers, basically 1 for Center, 1 for Harrington, and 1 for Byam, given caseloads. South Road does not need one at this point because they do have a slightly smaller population. They have a slightly smaller population coming up from CHIPS, and we've been able to analyze those IEPs, and the school has confirmed that they don't need that for next year. But by adding an additional special ed teacher at those 3 schools, what it's also going to allow them to do is really shift some of their model, because right now they have 4 special ed teachers for the building, but they have 5 grade levels. So they have K1, 2, 3, 4. If they actually now have a 5th general special ed teacher, they're going to be able to do more grade level specific interventions, whether they're pushing it to classrooms or they're doing some small group activity. It's really going to provide them some flexibility, and it's also going to help us meet the demands of the current IEPs. So I think that's going to be very significant for the schools, and again, direct services for kids within the buildings I think is going to go a long way. The next recommendation is to actually add and then split a BCBA between Center and Harrington schools. When we take a look, ironically, 3 years ago or 4 years ago, when we started looking at our enrollments, we were all concerned about Byam and the housing developments that were going up in the Byam neighborhood. We're actually seeing the biggest influx of students at this point in time, and even as we're doing our enrollment for kindergarten for next year, are in the Center and the Harrington districts. The Center is blowing up. Even on a day-to-day basis, when we're getting new enrollments to the district, they're coming at Center. So Center and Harrington don't have BCBA support now within their buildings. Again, when we met with the principals and the admin teams to talk about this, South Row is housing the Strive program. And there's a BCBA dedicated to that program, but just being in the building also allows them to consult and help with other student behavioral or therapeutic needs. Byam has the luxury of, they host the ASD program for the district, but they also have a full-time BCBA for that program. But again, being in that building, they're there to support the other students at the Byam school. We don't have substantially separate programs at Harrington or Center where they have BCBA support. I think both schools would probably love a full-time, but what we said is let's try to actually implement a full-time split between the two schools so that they would actually have direct support for their general population. Because more than half, and my rationale for this is more than half of the time that the BCBA at Byam or at South Row is servicing their specific program. The other half of the time, they might be helping the school. This will at least provide some consistency and some continuity in the services we're providing school to school. So I think that's going to go a big way towards helping some of the, again, not only the students, but even the teachers, develop some behavior plans and implement behavior plans, and having an extra set of hands in the building to see that through. I think that's going to be welcomed. Our next additions have to do with McCarthy Middle School. So the Strive program that we developed at the elementary school and currently housed at South Row is doing phenomenal. We've received great feedback from staff and students for that particular program. It's gone very well because I think we staffed it properly. We provided a lot of training up front, and we didn't try to just kind of half do it or make it work. But that particular program was developed, number one, the staff of not only that program, but the school have been so accommodating to make the program work. But it really has happened because we have a full-time dedicated BCBA to help set up the constructs of the program. We have dedicated special ed teachers within the building. We have dedicated para support for that program. We're not polling to try to make things happen. But it's obviously working so well that a lot of those students are regulated now and are coming back into our regular classrooms, and some are going to continue to need services, and they're now going up to the middle school level. So we don't have that continuum of programming at the middle school level. We started it at South Row. But this past year, we had 1 or 2 students that went up from 4th to 5th grade. This next year, we have some more students that are going up. And when we sat back and actually took a look at our program at the middle school level, and if we were going to develop a middle school counterpart to the elementary Strive program, where could it go? I think it could be successful in either middle school. This really came down to space. And Parker honestly does not have the space to house the program, but McCarthy does, and McCarthy has the program. So what we would like to do is basically replicate the elementary Strive program we have at South Row, but bring it up to the middle school level. So what that is going to entail is 3 parts. One, a BCBA to basically oversee that program. Also additionally be able to provide some additional supports to McCarthy, which I think will be helpful to the staff and the students in the building. We are going to need a dedicated special ed teacher, just one, for those 5th and 6th grade students, because the model typically is the teacher can go over 2 grade levels or cover 2 grade levels for us. At South Row, we have 2 teachers, but again, they're covering K. There's not a lot of K students, but like 1 to 4. But for this next year, we really just have to cover the 5th and 6th grade students that we're going to have in the program. So we're recommending 1 special ed teacher. The other thing you have to provide the students with is psychological services or some kind of behavioral services. At the middle school level, and again, you have a memo from Amy in here, when we took a look at the number of psychologist staff or any kind of clinical staff we have to work with students, we again have not enviable caseloads at the middle school level. And if you think about it at the district level, we invested in clinicians and the clinical psychs a few years ago. At each of our elementary schools, we have a full-time psychologist. that's dealing with about 450, maybe tops 500 students. You then, so that's 4. You then jump to the 2 middle schools, and there are only 2. There's 1 per building. So they have a caseload of about 800 students because of the size of the middle schools. Then you go from the 2 middle schools, you go up to the high school, and we have the house model now. So you actually have 3 psychologists. So you think you would at least want to mirror caseload-wise what we have at the high school. So the recommendation here is to add an additional school psychologist position, split between the 2 middle schools. When they're at McCarthy, what we're obviously going to have to figure out, Dr. Steve is phenomenal as a clinician at McCarthy. What would make the most sense as far as would it be for him to provide and really do the direct services for the new STRIVE program? Would it be this new individual who's splitting the 2 schools? That's going to be a school-based decision that the staff is really going to have to kind of wrestle with and wrap their head around. But we know one way or the other we have to take some of the caseload off Dr. Steve and Dr. Sue. Even just the number of assessments we have isn't going to allow them to have any real direct contact with these additional students. This year, we will actually see a little bit of a savings on the grant because we have had to contract for some psychological services from the outside, just because Dr. Steve and Dr. Sue can't keep up with the number of referrals. So we will actually see a little bit of a savings, but the savings is on the SPED grant. It's not reflected in the operating budget. But I think, again, that's going to go a long way for us. Continuing on. So a couple of things are happening because I know class size is obviously significant for us, and we've talked a lot about this. So one of the things that I have included in the budget is 1 additional teacher at Center Elementary School in 4th grade. And I'm going to show you the list in a second. And then as we look at our kindergarten registrations, remember I told you that really they're coming in very high. The way we build the budget is we build it based on a 4-strand configuration. So we have 4 classrooms staffed at each of the 4 elementary schools. But I can tell already from the winter registrations that we had that we're going to have a high number. So I have included funding for 2 additional kindergarten teachers, but I haven't designated where because I honestly don't know yet until we're done the spring registration where they might be needed. But I didn't want to get done the budget and then all of a sudden have to find money for 2 positions. So I did not include the FTE number, but I included a dollar amount of what 2 teachers is going to cost in the kindergarten line, so that I can come back to you this spring and say, okay, I think we need to put a teacher at Center or a teacher at Byam or Harrington or South Row based on the actual kindergarten enrollment. We just don't know it at this point. But I don't want to dig ourselves in a hole and not have funding available once we know where the teacher needs to go. Let me switch gears here for 1 second. So in the packet, on page 72, I'm just going to put it up on the board so that if the public's watching, they can see this. What I did for next year is roll forward our current enrollments. This is your page 72 of our current kindergarten students who we know are going to be first. Our current first who we know are going to be second, third to fourth. And plugged in those numbers. Again, we know there's not going to be a big shift between schools, so we're pretty much locked into these numbers. And I listed in yellow the recommendations on the number of sections to have within the schools. So during our current school year right now, we actually have 8 bubble classrooms. So we have 8 extra teachers floating through the elementary schools to basically bring our class sizes more in line with what we would like them to be. So what I'm recommending next year at Center, which is the second block down, we currently have 103 students in 3rd grade, but we did not make an adjustment to that because, again, it had been a little bit of a moving target, and we were trying to stay at or under that 25 limit. But for next year, that's the one new one that I'm actually recommending, going to 5 sections, partially because of just the increased enrollment at Center, and I don't want to get into a situation where if we don't staff it from the outset, and then we end up with 4 or 5 or 6 kids coming in over the course of the year, it's going to be much harder to add after the fact. So those 9 yellow sections would be where I'm actually recommending we have 5 classrooms. Again, the cost is basically 1 teacher because we have 8 teachers already as our bubble teachers. We unfortunately this year don't have any 4th grade filtering up. Next year, we're going to be able to pick up 2 teachers here. We'll save 2 teachers because we'll have 4th grade going up to 5th, but we just don't have that right now. So basically, you'd be looking at class sizes if you looked at Byam at the top. Again, we don't know what's happening with kindergarten. That's why those numbers are zeroed out. 20, 23, 21.8, 22.5, which I think is right on target for what we're shooting for. At center, again, 22, 21, 21, 20.6. Could you argue not to put that class in? Yes, but then you're starting the year with 25 and 26, and you're not buying yourself a lot of flexibility in the event additional kids come in. At Harrington, 19.4, 20.8, 20, 21.6, I think is right where we want to be. And then at South Row, 21, 23, 23, 20. So I personally think those are very desirable elementary school numbers. We've talked a lot about class size and whatnot. I think it's worth investing in the extra teacher for fourth grade at center. And I also look at long-term. We know at center, there's 2 grade levels that are coming up right behind that are gonna have 5 sections. So if we know they're coming 2 years later, why not implement it now and actually have that class benefit also from some lower class size out of the gate? I will tell you, this didn't change my recommendation. It's getting tight. There is not a lot of extra space, particularly at center, and we had only put the 4 modules because that's all we had space with at that school. So we are gonna have to do some shifting around the building to make room for that extra class. And again, I don't know what's gonna happen with kindergarten. So there's always the outside chance that's gonna be one of the schools I'm gonna come back to you at and recommend an additional kindergarten section after enrollment. And then we're really gonna have to scramble a little bit and try to make things work over there. But again, I just don't want to be in a position where we don't have the funding available when we have the numbers. I'm going back to the presentation.
Does the book have somewhere this chart for middle school?
No, the middle school chart I didn't update the middle school chart because we don't have any bubble sections. In the report that I gave you in December, it was
Okay.
either December or January, it was the middle school projection. I can email it to you again,
Okay,
okay?
thank you.
No problem. All right, so that's the first bullet on this page. And then the last bullet on this page, as far as additional services go, one of the things that we have a very successful model with is in our grants, our Title I grant right now. We have what we call interventionists within some of the schools. They provide, again, some of the Tier 2 instruction that we've been talking about. Small group, intensive reading, intensive math in schools for students that need it. One of the issues that we have is we have vulnerability from year to year with regard to how much Title I funding we're gonna get. In this particular year that we have now, we have basically 4 interventionists, 2 ELA, 2 math, at Byam, at Center, and at Harrington because of the Title I funding, but we don't have any at South Row. Now, South Row had them a couple of years ago because of the way the Title I fell, but then this particular year, based on funding, they didn't get any. So it's very difficult when you have schools, you have a resource, you take a resource away. You have 4 one year, you have 2 another. It just becomes very difficult to plan. At our middle schools, we actually have 1 at Parker and 1 at McCarthy right now. A fabulous resource, but honestly doesn't go deep enough if we really want to get into those supports that we've been talking about for quite some time. So I included money in the budget. We call it tutoring though, because we already had a line item for tutoring. And I want to really be able to be careful and keep our local budget positions separate from our grant positions. But it's basically the same concept. But I built in, assuming that hopefully the grants are going to stay consistent for next year, funding to support 10 of these part-time. There's no benefits or anything like that, just part-time hourly tutors, so that we could have 4 at, say, South Row if they come up without funding again, and we could add another 3 to Parker and McCarthy, and basically be able to tell the schools coming out of the gate, you can budget for 4 of these interventionist tutors type positions. That you can set your schedule up to know that you're gonna have a body to be able to go help create these small group instruction groupings in the buildings, and we're not dependent on grant funds to come through. So I included that in the budget, and I'll show you where when we get to that page. But I think that's going to obviously be well received as well as a direct service. Just a couple of other small things. The first one is just again utilizing the school choice funds for the second year of the 101 Chromebook initiative. We have that already launched, but there's money in there for that, and I think that's going to be really well supported by the additional TIS and the 2 aides in the computer labs. And then I am recommending also just a further reduction of $25 to the middle school student activity fees. So in the current budget, last year I had recommended reducing the fees from 100 to 75. I built in funding to be able to reduce that further from 75 to 50. I actually, and obviously that's my recommendation. Personally, stepping back from it, I actually think $50 is even $100 wasn't bad, but $50 for, some buy-in, to be able to go to clubs, 2-3 days a week and a lot of different clubs. Get transportation home if you need to. $50 for the entire year, I actually think is a bargain and a value. And I think it's gonna provide us that little bit of incentive and a little bit of commitment from the students. So I don't know that I'm actually in the future gonna recommend going less than that. We'll see how this goes. But I did include funding to be able to go from 75 to 50. The high school staying the same at $100 for all clubs that you end up participating in, any of the paid ones. The free ones will remain free, but any of the paid clubs, $100, and we included transportation as well, so there's no additional cost for students for transportation. So I know that was a lot to take in. When you get a chance to go through the book itself, one of the things I'll help you with is just kind of the layout, how to read it. But, what I hope would happen after this is that you take it all in. Staff will, if there are members of the community that have questions, that they'll ask. We will have a public hearing on the 25th, where we'll actually go page by page. I'll explain the different pages. You'll vote up or down on the pages. You have the ability to modify different elements of the budget that you like, that you don't like. This, I will tell you, our administrative staff in the district with a lot of input has spent about 2.5, 3 months working on this document. And I think it actually takes us significantly further than I thought we were going to be able to go this year with that funding. Again, a bunch of things fell into place as far as the continued town commitment for funding the schools. We're very appreciative of that. Some additional savings with school choice, circuit breaker is significant. That school choice allocation to be able to go towards the one-on-one computer initiative is significant because then we don't have to offset that in the local operating budget. And again, this is all in line with the programming that we've been talking about. And every single one of these positions and services are really direct supports for students. These are services that you're gonna see in schools, in classrooms, directly supporting students. A lot of this is also providing assistance and support for our staff. So that they're properly able to do their jobs in the schools because they're going to be supported well. And that's something I've heard from staff and I've heard from you as well, that we want to make sure when we're putting these recommendations together that they're really meaningful. I will, just as an aside, email this to all the town meeting reps. We'll email them a link to our budget page. I'll get this up online later on tonight so that the community can access it if they'd like to. I am open, and I highly recommend, as you read this document, if you have questions, please let me know earlier than later. The more I can get for background information for you before the budget hearing, the easier that night goes. It's not that you can't ask questions or you can't ask something different of that night, but if it's a quick information piece you want, and I can get it to you ahead of time, and it just helps the discussion that night to inform and keep things moving, it just makes everything go a little bit smoother. When it comes to format, so the first 15 or 18 or so pages of the budget, 15 pages actually, are your budget narrative, and again, that outline of all the new things that are actually built into the budget. Page 16 is your summary level totals. So again, these are all of your DESI function codes down the left, and in the far right-hand column, you actually see the budgeted figures. So these are the line items that the school committee votes to approve, and then once you vote to approve those figures, if I need to transfer or make a recommendation to transfer money from one line to another, these are the lines that I have to come back to you with the request for that authorization. So technically, as we go through the budget, the first line item is function 1110, school committee. That's on page 17. And that bottom line budget 33.4 ties out to the 33.4 on the top page. So we'll go through page 17, ask any questions, comments, concerns that you may have, and then ultimately take a vote to approve a bottom line for that budget. Every single budget page is the same. If you flip to page 28, for example, I've continued with the notes section. So anytime you see either a significant increase in dollars or you see a significant increase in FTEs, we make a little note in the budget book just so you can see where it tied out from those main pages so you don't have to flip back and forth the whole time. Typically, committees have found that useful, and the public too, when they're reading the budget book, to have those footnotes. I know even FinCom had mentioned that they liked them, so that's there. The budget itself concludes on page 52. So ultimately, at the end of the whole process, you'll see that on page 52, the far right-hand corner, my recommended budget to you is $63 million, which ties to the town manager's recommendation. That'll be a vote that you take to technically appropriate or recommend approval of $63 million. Even after it's approved, again, you have the flexibility to go through it, but that's the blueprint for our spending for the year. On page 54 is where the staff salary book starts. So for newer people taking a look at this document, or anyone from the public who wants to take a look at it, this is basically a crosswalk back to the main document. So if you look at page 54, and you look at, well, Sharon, I'm going to call you out. So Sharon happens to be the first staff member listed as the school committee secretary. So the salary that's listed on the top of page 54 is crosswalk back to the salary line on page 17. All right, so it literally reads right down the way. You can see your FTEs on the left, and you can see all your dollar amounts. So it all ties out perfectly as you go through the document. And again, I think that's just helpful as you look at it. Page 68, I'm just going to walk you through the appendices. Page 68 is our student enrollment summary. And again, this is what I pulled up on my screen. But this is our current enrollment. And then again, you have those bubble sections that I'm recommending. So when you have some time, you can look further into that. Appendix B starts on page 73. This is your listing of all the clubs in the district. And again, Joanna put a nice worksheet together on page 75 that justifies and balances for you that if we take that additional $50 reduction in revenue that we're anticipating from the students at the middle school level, how we have to add about $20,000 to the local operating budget to be able to make that reduction. So that sheet on page 75 is a crosswalk of that for you. Appendix C is the grant summary, starts on page 76. Again, that's been consistent year over year. Just gives you a sense of all the different grants, entitlement grants and competitive grants that the district receives. Page 79 is your appendix for your revolving and grant funds. And again, this is just your summary level document. You receive a lot of this information already in your quarterly reports that Joanna prepares for you. But if you take a look at the far right-hand column, you'll see after we close the fiscal year what we're anticipating the balances of the funds to be. And again, we're carrying very sufficient funds in all of our revolving accounts that we can. You know, the big ones that jump out to us are our food service fund, our circuit breaker reimbursement fund, ComEd, student activities, right down the line. So we have positive balances and projections for all of those. We have had, so next page 81, we've had a few people ask about that financial review that Roger Hatch had come in to do with us. So I actually included that in the budget document, just so it's there, it's online, people can read it if they want to, they can skip it if they want to, but it's all part of the document, so that is there. And then lastly, that new section, as I indicated, Appendix F on page 113. These are some individual rationales that different administrators in the district put together for me that just further justify or provide, again, the rationale for those increases that are included in the budget. So that's what I have for you this evening. I'm actually very pleased with what we're able to put together for this year, budget-wise. I hope you are too. I take, notes over the course of the year of different things that we talk about, actions that we want to make as a group, even though we're not done our strategic plan yet, different elements that people have talked about, the direct services, really getting a little bit deeper into the Tier 2 and Tier 3 interventions. So we've really been fortunate to be able to include a lot of that in this budget, which I think will be well received in the schools, obviously, and I think the community, because it keeps us moving forward. So thank you. I'm happy to answer any questions you have this evening about the budget itself or anything, but then we'll really get deep into it on the 25th.
Any questions at this point? Donna?
Just a quick one. Are we going to include the PTO page like we did in last year's budget?
Yeah, I just need to coordinate with them. That one we didn't include it in this budget. We included that one in the final one that you approve. That goes to town meeting.
Yep.
So, yeah, it'll be as an appendix in the back of that.
Great, thank you.
25th is when you want questions only?
No, I mean, if you have a
Okay.
question now, I'm
So
happy.
if you can just explain to me on these new positions that we added, because you're saying that we're gonna have an increased number, very likely in K students coming in?
We don't quite, this is I'm speculating, right?
We're
We don't
thinking
quite
we
know
will.
right now. We have always budgeted 4 classrooms at the elementary level at each grade level. So the base budget has 4 kindergarten classrooms at Byam, 4 Center, 4 South Row, 4 Harrington.
Okay.
Based on the registration that we had last week, we had some high numbers. We also know that there's a larger number than usual coming up from CHIPS. So I'm keeping all these things in mind. What I don't know is, because again, we don't have data on this, did more people happen to come out in January to sign up for kindergarten than normal that aren't gonna come in April? Because you know how we do a second section? But what I accounted for is I just have a sneaky suspicion that it's gonna go high. In the budget, I've included 2 additional kindergarten
Yes.
teachers as a set-aside. I just am not telling you what schools I'd recommend them to go to yet, because I don't know where the numbers are gonna fall out.
Okay.
But once we know, then I would say, here's my recommendation, we go to Byam or
So
Center or
that's a
Harrington.
possibility of a greater number there. Last time we met, we talked about was the last time of the meeting before, the numbers of students that tested out on dibbles and so on for
Right.
the, oh my gosh, thank you, the literacy, component and so on. That was a pretty high number. If we have an increased number coming in, maybe I don't understand these, special education, teachers that are coming in, these positions that you've allocated here, but I don't see any increased support for literacy at all in here. Am I wrong?
You're wrong.
Okay, where is it?
Well, there's a significant increase at the elementary school level in particular. By adding those 3 special ed teachers, that is very significant, particularly for those incoming kindergarten and first grade students. Even just dropping your caseloads and being able to get them more directly into classrooms is gonna be huge. In addition to that, those interventionist tutoring positions, adding, those positions to the budget is significant. And being able to count on it without grant funds is gonna
Okay.
be significant.
Well, yeah, but they're not specifically reading specialists. They're definitely, these people that are coming in are just general special ed teacher positions, not
No.
specialists for reading.
No, the special education teachers are licensed special education teachers. That
Yeah.
would be at the 3 elementary schools. Right?
Okay?
Okay. The interventionists or the tutoring type
Tutors.
positions, no, they can have specific backgrounds as well. I've actually previously been able to hire retired teachers. Oftentimes, teachers might want to come back and actually work. We can really attract some incredible people to those roles that have both reading and mathematics backgrounds. You remember, we have 2, which is a luxury. We have 2 full-time reading specialists in each of our elementary schools right now.
But we've
most-
had that for a very long time.
Yes, but I'm saying most schools don't have that.
Wow, okay.
So we have that, which is significant.
Okay. I'll just keep it that way for now, if nobody else is thinking
Sure.
that way, because I just think honestly that we've got increased numbers everywhere, indicators that we're gonna need greater intervention in that area, and that I don't think it's allocated for here. I understand what you're saying to me about having tutors and about having those are general people with IEPs. These kids that were tested and so on don't have IEPs yet. So, I don't believe so.
Some may,
Tell
some
me
may, not.
otherwise.
Some may not.
66, out of 66 already have,
No, some may not. But they're likely seeing the reading teacher in the schools now.
right. So the load is already increased.
Right, and our special educators, many of them have like an OG background or Wilson background. So even though you're a special educator, it doesn't mean you may not have the background to be working with these students.
I personally have experienced the difference when it's a person who is really well-versed in being a reading specialist. So, I mean, I'm gonna look at the actual numbers and I'll come back and give you greater comments, but I just did not see that addressed at all.
I'm sorry, I forgot already. What was I supposed to say?
What's that?
Must have been amazing.
Come back to me. I have to click
She's
back on it.
forgotten
Oh.
her thought.
There it is, I just came back. Linda, you had mentioned that we were looking at some new curriculum that was, needed to be updated, it's 9 years old. Literacy and phonics?
Yep, so a few things are happening. One is Foundations. That is a phonics program. So no matter what reading program we go with, Foundations would be probably our main phonics program. We right now have 2 pilots happening. One is Into Reading, which is through Houghton Mifflin, and the other one is called Fontes and Pinnell Classroom, which is with Heinemann. So right now, we have teachers that are doing the Foundations at K1 and now possibly 2, because I spoke with a few teachers today. And then we have sets of teachers K through 4 doing the 2 programs so that they'll come together with the committee and kind of talk those things out. They receive professional development, all of them did, so Foundations, which will address these phonics pieces, right? And it's a component of Wilson, so it has a Tier 1, a Tier 2, and then obviously they would have, a Tier 3, they would be receiving specific services, but it works together. So right now, they have professional development in January with their specific programs. They're meeting again next week with their specific programs. The companies are coming out. And then as a team, they're working on a rubric that we have to assess the programs to see what pieces it has. And then we will have a recommendation for what direction we should be going in. So these programs do address a lot of the components that we are missing right now or cannot, continually sustain with our Journeys program.
Do we need to account for that anyplace?
Yeah, I think she was more concerned about the money.
Oh, I thought you wanted information. Yeah, I need money.
She was very interested in the program, but it was more about how you're going to pay
I did
for
this
it.
job though, right?
So we've done 2 different things. In the budget for fiscal '21, in the textbook line, we've actually increased it by $250,000. We're anticipating this is a big purchase, so this is potentially a $750,000 purchase. But we have included about $250,000 of additional funds in the textbook adoption line, and then the recommendation for the balance, once we actually negotiate with the vendors and have a contract, would be a recommendation for one-time money from this year's budget, which would actually be appropriate as far as it not being a recurring expense year over year.
And then just to go back to Maria's point, I think we may be talking about 2 different things here. We may be talking about some students who need some type of reading intervention, and then there may be some students with specific learning disability who need a specific type of intervention. And are we doing, am I wrong? Is that what you're kind of getting at here? Are we doing something to provide the programming that's necessary for these kids at the early grades to hopefully support them and allow them to develop skills that will support them as they move through the system? And then we're very, I'm happy that we do so much at the elementary levels. I am concerned about what happens once they hit middle school, if the same type of support is provided for them, so they can continue making that progress or maintain the skills that they've developed. Because I think that one of the things that we've been hearing quite a bit about is that they come out of elementary school strong, do pretty well through 5th and maybe 6th grade, and then the wheels kind of come off around middle school. And then they really experience a lot of difficulties. And again, I'm talking about a very specific thing here. I'm not talking about.
But we've talked about this in the past. I mean, that's a
Right.
very specific profile too.
Right.
It's not, it's not your masses. But I think, obviously, we've looked at the middle school, particularly, I mean, that would fall into special education. We've looked at the middle school sped caseloads and sped numbers, and they're sufficient to be able to cover this. I think one of the things that we're trying to do, and I know the sped staff is trying to do, is actually get more of our internal staff, the special ed teachers, trained in your OGs and your Wilsons to be able to, because right now it becomes a scheduling issue in some schools where you might have a particular teacher at a particular grade level who doesn't have a particular reading training. So they're trying to manipulate schedules to be able to get the student to the teacher. But obviously, if we can have more teachers receive that training, and that's what we do have funding on the special ed grant to be able to provide that, it's just time consuming, and it's a commitment on the teacher's part as well. But that is something we're working on.
It is a big commitment,
Yeah.
and it is very time-consuming, you're absolutely right. But currently, we're bringing in outside people, right, outside with OG people, in order to be able to provide services for some of our students at the
No,
high
we-
school level.
Yeah, I mean, there are a number of different, like, contractors that
Yes.
we do hire for different services.
Right.
No, we do have a significant number of our own staff that are Wilson and OG trained at the elementary, middle, and high school level.
Any other questions, John?
Yeah, so Donna and I have been kind of working in the background. So this is actually going to affect two things. So there's a budget ask in this, and there's also going to be an agenda ask. One of the things we've been looking into for the district is potentially doing a third-party special education audit on process. We've looked a little bit into costs. We've looked at some of the reporting. There's different methodologies. But we think it would be kind of smart to bring some visibility to maybe improve process and things like that. We didn't want to do it post-budget, and we didn't want to have the discussion. And obviously, this has to go to the larger committee for any kind of approval or debate and for just general public discussion. But it is something that we think would clear things up for parents, and it's something we've been working on for a while, and we have a bunch of data that we can provide. And we've looked at some other third-party audits. But in terms of the budget, we really need to understand what the cost looks like, timing, frequency. There's a whole bunch of things that we'd have to figure out as a committee. But it's something I think we'd like you to consider for the budget this year.
I think we did one in the past. It isn't the recent past. I think it may have been before you were here, where there was a third-party audit for special education services, so.
Third party, not second party.
That's
Third
what I-
party. Third party.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't been privy to these conversations, so you'd have to fill me in more.
Yeah, we'll get you some more.
We're in the middle of a coordinated program review from the Department of Ed. We had done a SPED one a couple of years back, and we're in cycle again right now to have another one completed.
Okay.
I honestly, without knowing where you're going, I don't know that I would want to throw another audit on top of that, just for the amount of time and effort, and I don't know what you'd be looking at finding-wise, but maybe if you want to fill me in offline with what you're thinking.
Yep.
Because I hadn't heard that.
It's because we haven't told you yet.
We just did.
Proactive communication would be.
Well,
would
we
be
wanted to
helpful.
make sure it was viable before we brought it in front of the committee. And then kind of the budget discussion kind of forced us to talk about it, right?
Right.
So we were thinking about something for next year, and we were like, when's the best time to bring it up? And the budget kind of forces the discussion. So, and then maybe a potential agenda item down the road, so.
Yeah, no, just clue me in on what you're thinking.
Yeah. It's gonna be really hard on you, for sure.
What's that?
Nothing.
Hey, anything else, Jeff? Good, okay. I personally am looking forward to going through this, and, so if we could, between now and the next meeting, just go through, each of the pages and earmark them and have your questions, and, bring it to the superintendent if you have them beforehand. I'd like to thank the superintendent and staff for putting this together, a lot of thought goes into it, a lot of work goes into it. Making sure that we meet our basic need, but at the same time, kind of try to move forward with programming and things like that, and also living within the parameters set by the town. And to echo what the superintendent said earlier, I'd like to thank the town meeting reps and the select board and the town manager for supporting the schools. The time I've been on the board, we've all worked very well together. I think we have a good team. We all understand, that schools are important, not just for the students, but for everybody that's in the town, property values and creating good citizens. So I do appreciate that, all those people have been involved, have done such a good job, and I hope to continue working with them, as we go forward. Okay, anything else?
Great work.
Okay,
Really
all right.
good work.
Okay, last thing,
Yeah, we have item number 5, an approval of a field trip. This is a potential field trip for the Chelmsford High School Theater Guild to attend the METG Finals on March 26th to 28th. I think some of this is performance permitting, but I'd recommend your pre-approval of that trip in the event that it's able to occur.
I make a motion to approve the conference and field trip requests as listed.
Second.
okay, any questions on the field trip or any comments on the field trip? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
5-0. All right, any liaison reports?
Yes, I have a few.
Good talk.
I'm sorry.
It's okay.
So first of all, the Chelmsford Friends of Music has an instrument test drive coming up on February 8th. South Row will be having their pancake dinner on March 19th, and recently had a very successful movie night. As Dr. Parks mentioned, we have the Parker Musical on February 7th and February 8th. There's also on the 6th, an 8th grade parent night from 6:30 to 8:30 at Parker. And finally, Parker and Harrington are sponsoring the Harlem Wizards on March 21st. And so they'll be looking for staff volunteers or administrative volunteers to
Looking at you, you know. Yeah.
be able to play
Well,
basketball.
I'll tell you right now, I'm not playing basketball. I'll be happily attend the game. I'd hurt myself if I tried to do that.
I played against them before, and
It's hard.
at the high school, they just tell you, stand there and don't do anything. The worst thing you can do
Maybe I could run
is-
the score clock or something. I
Yeah.
don't know that I could,
The worst
Do the
thing you want to do is
play-by-play.
try to play basketball against them, because it can prove ugly. And,
Yeah, no, I think it's going to be a great event. A lot of
It
planning has gone
sounded
into
fun.
this. Yeah.
yeah, they do a nice job.
All right, Maria, you had some?
Okay, so, the Harrington folks who are my, PTO that I go to, they did have their Heritage Fair the last time that we had a meeting. It was extremely successful, as Linda said at the beginning of the meeting. And, I think that, it did an incredible job of bringing community together, not only just the Harrington community, but the entire community, which is very good. EL Council will have a meeting coming up on the 19th of March, so there's gonna be another meeting. We've had one already this year, there'll be another one. McCarthy, I did go to their meeting as well on the 5th of February. They will have their science fair, so that's coming up if anybody wants to attend that. And on March 27th is their rock and roll bingo. That's going to be coming up. There were quite a few parents at the McCarthy meeting, the PTO meeting, and a lot of the discussion was around actually the high school presentation here. And I think the reason was because they're transitioning, quite a few are going to be transitioning over to and attending the 8th grade session. So there was quite a bit of discussion. And just to, the discussion centered around the reasoning for the combination of the H2 and the level 3, and what that will do to the current H2 students, the impact on them. So just to let you know that.
I'm sorry, Maria, this was at the high school PTO or the McCarthy?
This was at McCarthy.
Oh, at
Because
McCarthy,
they're gonna
okay.
be transitioning over to the high school. So I did recommend that folks write to us, call with any questions or concerns on that. Okay, and then I'm going to echo what Jeff said. I thought the children's play was wonderful, because it was all done by students, and so that was tremendously wonderful. Coming up, Chelmsford High School hosts the first rounds of the competition play, and that will be coming up at the end of this month. And we have, of course, we're doing our entry, which is Drooling, the Hunted Wrens. And so watch for that day. You might just want to come to see that one performance, which is usually around 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and it's about 40 minutes long.
Only 40 minutes?
Say that again?
It's only 40 minutes?
Yeah, they have to
40
get it done
minutes.
within 40 minutes.
It's limited.
Okay.
Oh, it's all
The
time.
team numbers are limited, the whole thing.
Set up, breakdown, and play in 40.
Okay.
These are a lot of the upperclassmen that perform in this,
Yeah, for some reason, I had an hour and a half in my mind. Maybe I'm
Oh,
thinking of something else.
competition,
Okay.
I went to the high school PTO last evening, and they're starting to gear up to prepare for the big event, the after-prom breakfast, which is a wonderful event for the seniors and other students who attend the prom. I know people always volunteer the day to set up, but they could really use parents to help them starting now, to help with the sending out the letters to businesses, et cetera. So anyone who's really interested, it's a wonderful event, and it's one that, you know, keeps the students safe. So just contact the high school PTO, because they're always looking for people to help them, especially with the solicitation from businesses.
Okay, anybody else? All right, and we are now to the second public comment section of our meeting. If anybody would like to come forward and has any comments, please give your name and address to the
Did Jeff?
recording secretary.
High school kids go.
Oh, if they want to.
Yeah, they can go. I
Did you want to go?
should go.
Okay.
I'm Alan Thomas, Precinct 5. I'm here tonight to talk about Paul Cohen, and eventually I hope to tell you why it's appropriate to come here. But first I want to give a little bit of background. My whole life has been involved with town government, including town managers. My grandfather was town clerk and accountant for 40 years. He was on the front page of the Globe because nobody lasts that long. My dad was superintendent of public works in 3 different towns, and Jude's grandfather was superintendent of schools. So in totally different areas, I saw what was going on in government for the good and for the bad, and I have a pretty good idea of what it takes to be successful as a town manager. I'm going to put my glasses on so I can see my notes and not become repetitive. I myself, as most of you know, have been a town meeting rep for 30 years and was on the school committee for 8 years until Jeff let me leave. So, in a short way of expressing it, it's hard to get good town managers. All you have to do is look around what's going on in other towns. Some are specialists in one area or another, but town manager job addresses so many different things. It's really difficult to find someone who has that extensive background and who will stay or will not be removed. It's not unusual for town managers to be removed. We have a town manager who, in my opinion, is knowledgeable and dedicated to the town, and all his evaluations have been positive. This is something I find very troubling. If all his evaluations have been positive, then with his extensive background and what he's been able to accomplish, why is he going to be asked to leave? It doesn't make sense to me. He's shown that he's not just okay, and you've probably seen ads where this is being played upon. He's excellent. It's not a question of just filling the position, but it's being done very, very, very well. So I don't understand this move to, in an executive session with a 4-to-1 vote to later remove him. And I want to make it clear, in case that some of you haven't been following this, it's not over. The petition's being circulated and other actions being taken to try to support him. A phrase that I often use in discussing Paul is that he resides out of town, but he lives here. Those who are active in town, he's wherever, whatever's going on, he's there, both formally as town manager and just because he's dedicated to the town. In some of the publicity that's been out, it's been pointed out that he's been past president of Rotary, which you know that I'm involved in. Paul is really busy. Most of you know that his kids have horses. And when they can't do the horses, on top of everything else, he has to take care of the horses. So he has family commitments, but he rings the bell for the Salvation Army. He goes out to Ryla, where our kids go for leadership training, and spends time, all on his own time. So when I say that he's dedicated to the town, it's not just a question of getting technical things accomplished, but making the town a better place and playing a major part in it. Our town's in good shape. Our financial situation's good. We have a good bond rating. Look what's happened with the town in terms of facilities. A new fire station, almost brand new police station. Public Works is still in process, but a new facility. Plans being made for proper development of the center of the town. A lot's gone on that's very positive. And he didn't do all of this alone. Probably his greatest strength is his ability to work with different kinds of people. It's hard in his position to keep the police, the fire, the highway department, and the schools all happy, because there's only so much money. It's not all about money, but it's hard to do. And he has a good relationship, the best of my knowledge, with all of these groups. A place that you can understand where this is really important is with capital budget. We we have roughly $3 million to allocate to meet major needs. So the fire department comes in, and if they need a truck, Paul listens, the other people listen. With his negotiation skills, they reckon, we gotta get the truck, so that this year, that's a priority. But next year, it could be that we need to repair something in the school district or whatever. So that ability to work with groups of people is essential. And as I say, in development of the capital budget, it becomes really obvious. You should be concerned. Why? Right off the top, Paul recognizes that quality education is important. You say, well, wouldn't all town managers? No. It's not that they don't think it's important, but it's down on the list a lot farther than it is with Paul. And so I think right off the top that that's something really to keep in mind. He works with us in two major ways. One with the capital budget, which I've made reference to several times, and in collective bargaining. The town is tied up with a police situation which hasn't been resolved, but I have been involved with collective bargaining with Paul and different people in a number of different situations and different levels. And Paul plays a major role from beginning to end in terms of working with us and understanding what's going on. Some of you are new, but you'll see him come in when we were approving a contract or whatever, because he's been there since it started. So he has, well, another important thing in simple terms is he has institutional knowledge. I think he spent here 14 years. He knows who the players are in town. He knows what works. He knows what doesn't work. And he's willing to put in the time that's necessary to try to have things come out so we have a quality town. As far as I know, his communication beyond when I was involved with the school department is good. So I hope that you will pay attention to what's going on. Really think about the role that he has played with support of education and how he's balanced it out with the rest of the town so that the police and the fire and Gary Persichetti, they all know what's going on. They all know when he comes forward and says, you know, in education we need this, because he goes forward and with the police, fire, and highway departments, it's the same thing. So I hope you'll support the efforts that are being made, because I think it's important not only for the educational part of our town, but for the whole town. I don't know an awful lot in terms of the details, because there aren't a lot of details at this point. If you follow what's going on in the newspaper, you'll know where petitions are and all those kinds of things. But as you know, there hasn't been any real explanation, which makes it particularly hard to accept that we're getting rid of a person with a level of experience. So I'll be glad to talk about it, otherwise I'll get out of the way so you can go home.
Thank you all for coming in, and, you know, again, from the perspective of somebody whose focus is on the schools, Paul's always been very cognizant of the schools and their needs, and very supportive of it, and, you know, I believe he's been a good town manager for, you know, in his time here, especially when it comes to the schools, so I would have to agree with you.
All right, thank you very much.
Great.
Thanks for coming in, Al. It's good to see you.
Great. I believe we are now going to adjourn to executive session.
Now you can leave now. Yeah.
We gotta take a break. They don't have to run out.
No, you don't.
don't have to
You have to make the motion
I gotta
first.
make the, yeah, we gotta do the whole thing.
John was going to jump the gun here when you
They're excited. Are you guys ready?
Yep.
Yep, we're-
All right. I make a motion to adjourn to executive session for the purpose of conducting strategy sessions in preparation for negotiations with non-union personnel and not return to regular session.
Second?
Jeff? Aye. Donna?
Aye.
Aye.
Hi.
Aye.
5-0. Right. Thank you very much.
It's really good to